Hey, hey everyone. Hey everyone. It's Naomi Wolf, and I'm here as promised with my citizen journalism tutorial. What is citizen journalism and why am I sharing this? Just fixing the set. I'm sharing it because citizen journalism is more important than ever in a time of fake news and in a time when so many media outlets are owned by oligarchs or by people who have vested interests in things like fossil fuels, for instance, which skews the coverage. Of course, as you know, more and more regional and local newspapers are being bought up by big conglomerates. In the United States, there are about four major news companies like Scripps Howard, like Gannett, who have bought up all of the regional newspapers and local newspapers. And so what that means is there's a huge dearth and absence of local news coverage. And it also means that with fewer and fewer bosses at the top, the range of news and the objectivity of news and the ability of journalists to dive deeply and fearlessly without getting squashed from the top is really being undermined. And this is not just an issue that we see in my country, the United States. It's really something that's happening in democracies around the world. Of course, non-democracies, where people are also watching this, they have unique problems involving freedom of speech. But I'm going to be speaking about citizen journalism that can be practiced without too much or any danger in virtually any democracy. And for those of you who are in non-democracies, we'll keep fighting that fight together here at DailyClout. It still matters if you're willing to be a citizen journalist in a non-democracy. It's riskier and scarier, and I don't want to downplay that, but these are tools that you can use as well, knowing what the risks are. All right. I especially wanted to do this tonight because there was a really important protest against climate change and for accountable leadership with the issue of climate change on the steps of the head of government, the parliament, I believe, in Canberra, Australia. And that was yesterday. However, a lot of people are on DailyClout's social media complaining that there was very little coverage of this in the Australian press. And they also complained, and this is just one example, but it's a good example for all of our countries, right? All of you can think of similar examples in your own country, I'm sure. Australians were complaining that their mainstream media, which means the big, highly funded news outlets, were downplaying how many people there were. This was really striking. I can vouch for these people because many independent eyewitnesses said that there were between 3,000 and 5,000 Australians gathered on the steps of their head of state in Canberra at this protest, but they said that news outlets were saying 1 to 200. And they were also complaining that news outlets were focusing on people engaged in kind of bullying behavior or petty vandalism or kind of minor acts of kind of rowdiness rather than all the peaceful, admirable civil dissent and protest that was also there to cover. So this happens a lot. I totally believe it. I've been at many, many protests. Protests are a really good example where the eyewitness experience of thousands of people peacefully engaged in civil action totally doesn't get reflected in major news outlets. And what does get reflected is hooligans or provocateurs. And we all know it's been thoroughly well confirmed that provocateurs do go to protests in order to provide the material, if you like, for major news outlets to focus on that allows news outlets and stakeholders in a society to not report something very threatening to elites in a society, which is a well-organized, effective protest. So that's just one example of why citizen journalism is so important. But there are many, many needs for citizen journalism other than protest and other than regional news. As budgets get tighter and tighter, journalists just don't have time to dig deeply into records, for instance. And one reason that we've broken so many amazing stories at DailyClout, and they're stories that major news outlets have followed. For instance, the geoengineering story, which many major news outlets followed after DailyClout broke it, or other stories like the stories of things happening in Palestine. So many, stories I can't, there's so many. The reason we were able to break these stories is not us. It's because citizens now with the internet, and especially with social media like Twitter and Facebook, where we did a lot of this reporting, have time to dig deeply into records, for instance, which is what journalists used to be able to do and no longer can. A great example is the Scottish referendum, where citizen journalists, directed by us on Twitter, really dug into reports of blank ballots being made available, invalid ballots in the Scottish referendum. And they had time. These were like retired people, moms at home. They had time to document, to go to the precincts, to track down people who had blank ballots, and to document a really effective piece of journalism, which was 400 eyewitness accounts of blank ballots at the Scottish referendum. So by the same token, citizen journalism with the story of Australia, individual journalists sitting alone in their cubicle don't have time, and in many cases don't even have the knowledge to answer questions like, what is the law on logging in Victoria, Australia? Or what is human rights law in Australia? Or who is the MP for that represents Portland, where a bunch of koalas were massacred in Australia, right? But citizens who are retired, a fantastic resource, who are home with kids who are taking a nap, who are unemployed people are an unbelievable resource, right? They do have time. Or, people who work all day at a job, whatever it is, waiters in a restaurant, or people working in a factory. There are smart people everywhere, and they can come home and engage in citizen journalism. All right, so what I'm going to give you right now is the basics for how to be an effective citizen journalist. So number one, and there are 5 main points. So number one, I'm going to talk about how you share your witnessing of an event in a way that major news outlets can use it. All right, this is different from writing. Okay, so this is like, say you go to a protest, say you are marching against Trump's acquittal in Midtown Manhattan tonight, or say you were in Canberra yesterday. All right, so a lot of people have phones and they take pictures or they take video. Number one, take pictures, take video, all right? It's very important for citizens to document these news events and not leave it to photographers at major news outlets to document the events. Now, timestamp your video or timestamp your photograph, all right? Because if it's not timestamped, when I was covering Palestine, I used to get so many pictures. People submitted them of bullying or bad behavior by IDF soldiers, but without a timestamp, without a where did this happen, I couldn't tell if this was fake news. So as great as your pictures are, you have to timestamp them. And that is the first step in verifying, in making it usable for other news outlets to take your video, take your picture, and use it. So timestamp it. And of course, when you're taking pictures, try to get context, right? It's really cool to get that picture of the two children sitting with their sign on the steps of the Canberra uh, Parliament. But that's not enough. You also need to go way out, and I want to credit my wonderful husband, a private investigator, for this, because, you know, being a PI and being a citizen journalist are quite similar. You also have to step way back or use a wide angle lens. If you're just using your phone, use your phone, but step way back. And in addition to those close-ups, get a contextual picture. Get a picture that shows the Parliament House, you know, get a picture that shows the thousands of people on the street. If you've got video, even better, pan the crowd, right? As well as getting those wonderful close-ups that tell a story. Okay, when you send your video or your pictures, don't just post them on Facebook, all right? Don't just post them on Twitter. Why do I say that? It's so tempting to make a Facebook page of the Canberra protest, or a Facebook page of the protest in New York, or a Facebook page of, you know, Marin County's fight against 5G telecoms. That's awesome for Facebook. Facebook makes fuck tons of money, right? Having you put your valuable content on a Facebook page. But guess what? Facebook owns the content that you post there. Twitter owns the content that you post there. The terms of use that you sign up for when you open a Facebook page or a Facebook account or a Twitter account say that the content belongs to Facebook or to Twitter. So don't leave it there, right? Because if you send a news outlet picture or video that you've posted on Facebook, they can't take it from Facebook. They can't use it. They can't download it from Facebook. They can't download it from Twitter. And it poses legal problems, okay, of licensing and intellectual property. Also, if the picture has already been published on social media, news outlets are less likely to want to reuse it because it's not an exclusive. So resist that temptation. I'm not saying don't do it, right? There's a public service aspect to posting on social media, but take enough footage, enough pictures, so that you can send pictures that have never been posted to that news outlet and say, these are exclusive for you. They haven't been used elsewhere. But don't send a Facebook link to a news outlet. Don't. They can't use it. When people send me wonderful pictures on Facebook to DailyClout, I love looking at them, but it drives me, you know, it makes me sad as a publisher because I cannot use them. All right, they belong to Facebook. The second thing that's really important when you send pictures and video to a news outlet, and you can do it to any news outlet. You can do it to The Age in Australia. You can do it to the New York Times. You can send in submissions. You can send in pictures, right? There, every newspaper or news outlet has a contact email. It's not going to get to a named editor. It's, you know, a low level of submission, but it's going to get in there. And if you're doing something that you've made usable through the techniques I'm teaching you tonight, they very well might use it. And if you go for smaller news outlets, there's an even greater likelihood because they're always desperate for usable, fresh content. All right. Second thing is, when you're sending in video, when you're sending in pictures, give permission in the email in writing. Say, and use the name of the publication. Like if you're sending me your pictures from the Canberra protest, say, you know, Dear DailyClout or Dear New York Times or Dear Sydney Morning Herald, I am sending you these pictures. You may use them. I give you permission. I have the permission, right? I have the license. I can license them. I own them. This is what you need to say. They are my photograph. I have the rights to them, is what is the language you want to use, right? And I give you the right to reproduce them and use them. You have to put that in writing. Why is that? Because it's kind of exciting. The things that you create are property. they have legal status. That's why Facebook wants you to give up your rights to them when you post them on Facebook. When you have taken a picture or you've taken video or you've written a blog, you've created intellectual property, and it's valuable. It has value in the marketplace, and most countries that are democracies have copyright law that assigns you the copyright. You have the rights. That means you can license that content if you can find someone willing to buy it for you, from you. However, it also means that you can give permission to use it. And if you're starting out as a citizen journalist, and really most places these days, if you want your work to be reproduced, I'm sorry to tell you, you probably can't sell it unless you're a very, very good photographer, very well established, or a very established writer. Start out just giving it away. Or if you're trying to do a service and call attention to your show, to your action, to a problem in your community, give it away, give the rights, because that makes it much more likely that it will be reproduced. I would love for us to live in a world in which every writer, every photographer, every citizen journalist sold the rights to his or her content. I'd love that. That is not the reality that we're living in. After the Huffington Post, the whole industry has collapsed. So people do have masses of content they can choose to publish for free. You want your content to be what the Sydney Morning Herald or the New York Times decides to reuse. When you're ready, you'll charge. But for now, don't aim for that, especially if your goal is to publicize a news event. All right. Lastly, when you are sending in news story that you've written, or video that you've created, or photographs of the historical event or the news event that you've witnessed, please try to confirm it with 2 independent sources. In other words, if I'm at the protest in the center of Manhattan, right in Times Square, and I write to the New York Times and I say, I witnessed that there were 10,000 people there. You really should cover this. And here are my photographs, or here's my eyewitness account. I'm just one person, right? They don't know that there were 10,000 people. However, if you can get multiple people or 2 independent people to write into the same news outlet and say, we are independently confirming that there were 10,000 people, and show video, you are much more likely to get that story run, to get coverage for your event, or even for them to use your quote or your account of the event. Why is that? And this is a good reason, right? I mean, it's really heartbreaking because I see so many people working so hard as activists and in social media to get mainstream news coverage. And they're like, there were so many people there. They're just not covering it. That's not necessarily the case. News outlets really do want news. They really do. But if a bunch of people on Twitter say, I saw 10,000 people at this protest, it's not news, right? Because people on Twitter are not named. They're not verifiable individuals. They're not verifiable sources. Same thing with Facebook. It isn't verified. It's not real news, I'm sorry to tell you, from a journalist's point of view. If you want it to be real news, the gold standard, which everyone should use, it's a good thing, is 2 independent sources verifying. And these are named sources. So if you're going to be a citizen journalist, I'm sorry, but for the most part, you have to step up and name yourself and give that editor or give that publisher your full real name and contact information. And if you can get 2 people to do that from your organization and say, we're independently verifying that we witnessed 10,000 people and here are photographs, you are much more likely to get coverage because you have confirmed this event. Now, why is it so important to put your name on that communication? It is so important because there has to be a contact person, or else it is not usable. Again, my heart, I cannot tell you how many times people have said, go to our Facebook page and report on this huge thing. And I've gone to the Facebook page, which, by the way, you should never ask a journalist to do, and I'll get to that in a minute. And there's been no human person that I can call to follow up and confirm that this event happened. So as a responsible editor, as a real journalist, I'm not going to report anything that I can't verify myself, ideally with two sources, but at least to start out with one named source that I can call and confirm is a real person. And in a time of fake news and bots, you understand the importance of that. So this is where you really have to dig deep into your soul and ask yourself, am I willing to stand up and be counted? Because so many people want news coverage and want others to pay attention to what they think is important, but they're not willing to step up and be named personally or to be a confirmed source. So I'll tell you in a minute how to get around that. But you really do need to kind of be a leader. I'm sorry. You really do. If you want someone to cover your story or your event, someone's got to show up. Someone from your organization has to show up to that reporter and say, I am the spokesperson, or I'm accountable for answering your questions and getting you additional information. And here's my full name, and here's my contact information. Among other things, if the reporter is going to do a big front page story, or even an inside story, page story, which is a big deal for an organization, right? They need to be able to attribute a quote. So it's not okay to send an email, and I'm sorry if I'm getting kind of passionate about this, but I run into this all the time and it breaks my heart. People want coverage so much, and news outlets want news, right? So there should be better matchmaking here. And people want the story to be covered, but when the reporter says, can I quote you? They say no. All right, that will not work. You have to send someone to be quoted, because when you've read a news story, you get to that paragraph and there's a quote from the group, and it always has someone's name on it, right? If it's a blind quote, it's bad journalism. Reporters only should use blind quotes if there's no one willing to come forward, if it's a super important story and they have no alternative. So don't be that person. Show up and put your name on it. All right. Now I'm going to talk about a never do this. And this is going to annoy some people, but I mentioned a few minutes ago that I get contacted with people saying, go to our website. Or I'll often say to someone who wants me to cover something, send me 800 words, a headshot and bio, and a couple of links in the piece. And they don't want to do the work. And I understand that. It's hard work to tailor a story to the needs of a specific news outlet. You really want to just throw up your website, which is hard work itself, and I'm not diminishing that, or you want to, put up your Facebook page and send that link to the reporter. I'm sorry. No, never. No, don't do it. Please, I beg you. Here's why. A reporter, first of all, most reporters are underpaid and overworked anyway. It's not the 70s. It's not all the king's men or all the president's men. These people are frantically juggling masses of information and need to get home to pick up their child at daycare at the end of the day. They do not have time to go to your website. Also, I'm sorry, but if you contact a reporter, I'm just being honest because I love you, all right? No one will tell you this. I will tell you. If you contact a reporter and say, go to my website, they think you don't know anything about the news business and that it's unprofessional. It's not what real people do when they are trying to get a story covered. And the other reason why, there's a good reason for this, they're not just being snooty or difficult. When I go to your website, there's going to be masses and masses of pages on the website that are not the story I need to write, okay? And it involves plowing through these masses of pages to find the story and then painstakingly taking facts from all these different pages, double checking them, putting them in an 800-word format, and publishing it after having checked with you that this is all correct. All right, that takes hours and hours, if not a whole afternoon, to produce one news story when you say, go to my website. Also, a website, frankly, is written, to please a lot of people. You can be pleasing donors. You can be pleasing, your school district. It's not written in language that's suitable for that specific publication. However, and this is something journalists should know, aspiring journalists or writers always, not just citizen journalists, always write for the publication you're pitching, right? The voice of the Huffington Post is a little different from the voice of Slate, which is different from the voice of The Age or the Sydney Morning Herald, all right? And they have very limited spaces. If they're Sydney Morning Herald or The Age, you're going to be writing an op-ed, and it's 800 words. It's a very specific format. You look up the guidelines on their website. If you're writing for the Huffington Post, you can go longer, and it's a less narrow format. But you need to be writing for that publication, or else the editor or the journalist feels like this person just doesn't care about our news outlet and doesn't care enough to tailor this story to our audience, right? You need to read that publication. What works for one is not going to work for another. And then you need to put together your story in a voice that publication would be delighted to post. And if you're too, I'm sorry, if you can't be bothered to draft something for that publication based on what's on your website, that's not a serious approach to a news outlet. And reporters, not even being snotty, not being elitist, they just will disregard that. Because everyone needs to feel like you care to make it good and to make it usable for them. All right. The last thing I want to say is, if you're going to be really fantastically effective and professional, the thing to do is to write a press release. And there are many, many blogs and formats online where you can get the template to write a press release, and we'll post one on DailyClout. But it is a pretty simple format, and it says who, what, where, why, and how. It has a body of narrative saying there was a march on the steps of the Canberra Parliament on February 4th. 3,000 people were there. The goal was whatever the goal is, and it's newsworthy for the following reasons. And now I'm going to restate something I cannot say enough. Whether you're just writing a query letter, which is what pitching an article to a news site is called. It's called a query letter. It's an email, either to the main blind email address, which someone will read, or else ideally to the editor for that subject. If it's a feature, write to the features editor. If it's about a city-based issue, write to the municipal or city editor. If it's a crime issue, write to the crime editor, all right? Find that person's name. It's not difficult, a couple of clicks of research, and send that in. If that person's email is not up on the site, call the main number and say, I'm looking for this person's email. You may not get it. They may give you that blind email, but you may get it. It's helpful to ask, and you never know. So send it to that person. But whether you're just writing an email query letter for an article, whether you're writing an op-ed that you're sending in ready to go, or whether you're sending out a press release, this is the DNA of citizen journalism or journalism. I'm sorry, I have to do it because they don't teach it anymore in third grade. Who, what, where, why, how, all right? I can't tell you how many times, and God bless my correspondents, right? They'll say, you've got to cover this, amazing event to educate people about fracking. And then I have to write an email saying, where is it? Who's doing it? What's the outcome you want? So you want to save that step, right? It's like pulling teeth. And honestly, journalists are exhausted and they want to kill themselves when they get a query that does not have the courtesy and knowledge to answer before the journalist asks any more questions. Who, what, where, why, how, all right? And don't assume people know. You're talking to, most news sites are global, right? So you can't say, there was a march in the West Village. You have to say the West Village, a neighborhood in New York City, right? You can't say 3,000 people assembled on the steps of Canberra. You have to say Canberra, Australia, the seat of government. This is called ID. You have to ID what you're talking about. But you have to say who was there, what was happening. You would not believe how many times people leave out what the thing is that they want to have covered. You know, who, what, where is it? Why is it happening, right? This is what news is. News is why. Why. It is not enough to say something's happening. You have to say why it's important. Why does it matter? So in the case of a Canberra climate march, just to use that one, you could use any number of events happening around the world. You would say something like, in the wake of devastating bushfires tied to climate change, right? And you'd also mention what outcome you want. I'm sorry to say, just like taking two examples that are in the news today, a big protest in Midtown Manhattan that made all the same mistakes. I'm not trying to single anyone out. And the big protest in Canberra, I still don't know, and it's not from the faults of the organizers, but it's from this inability of breaking through mainstream news. I don't know what the goals are as a reader. I don't know what those people wanted, all right? I'm sure that if I dig enough, I'll find it. And I know that the organizers sent press releases out. But if there's something I could say over and over and over, journalists and editors need repetition. And they need talking points. You need to say the same thing again and again and again, really simply, in multiple platforms for the world to understand it and for mainstream news to report on it. So, and the Occupy movement made this mistake so much so that it was a huge movement and we still don't know what they wanted, all right? So you need to say what the outcome is you want, all right? The people marching against the impeachment, what do they want? What do they want? Another impeachment? Maybe. Do they want President Trump to lose in November? Maybe. Do they want, Congress to go home and have a timeout and sit in the corner? Maybe. I don't know, right? Because for whatever reason, that repetition of the goal either hasn't happened enough, and it hasn't taken place in the mainstream media. So if the mainstream media won't repeat your goal, you need to make it simple by having a slogan, right? The right wing is so good at this. Left wing never does it. Grassroots people really don't often know how to do it. A simple slogan, say it over and over and over. Make America great, right? That's a simple slogan. If you want a climate bill, say climate bill now. If you want a second impeachment, say second impeachment now, right? If you want to, send bankers to prison, as the Occupy movement maybe did, say that if they commit a crime. Like, say what it is you want simply. And repeat, whether in a press release, a query letter, an 800-word op-ed, say what you want. Who, what, where, why, and how. Okay, just 3 more quick points. I have told people elsewhere how to write a blog or how to write an op-ed. I will refer you to my op-ed writing videos elsewhere because it's too long for this quick tutorial. But quickly to reprise for an op-ed, and again, Sydney Morning Herald, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, every day they run op-eds, all right? Opinion pieces. In Britain, these are called leaders. This is a fantastic forum for you as a citizen journalist to bring your argument or your news event, but really your argument that can mention your news event, to the widest possible audience. Do it. Write an op-ed. And let me assure you something amazing. You have a very good chance of getting it published if you follow the guidelines I'm giving you. Why is that? You may think, I'm just a housewife in a suburb of Melbourne, or I'm just a factory worker in Detroit, or I'm just a 16-year-old high school student. That's why you are going to get published if you follow these guidelines, because op-ed pages are so sick of getting the same highly trained, primarily white men in think tanks or commentators saying the same thing over and over. They need diversity on their pages. They need new voices every day. And people who are underrepresented, people of color, women are usually only 15 to 30% of bylines, not because they don't want them, because women tend to not submit. They say, I'm not an expert. Get that out of your head. Underrepresented people from different class backgrounds, from different ethnicities, different genders, all right? Those are the voices they're looking for. So because you are not that guy you see every night on Australian broadcasting or NBC or the BBC, that's why you have a good chance of getting in if you just follow these guidelines. So the format is 800 to 1,000 words, topic sentence that's newsworthy, tied to news events, ideally arresting, a news hook, right? Stop the reader in his or her tracks. And then an introduction. What's your essay about? Then you transition, and transitions are very undervalued and undertaught. A transition means you're taking the reader from this room to that room, from the introduction to your main first paragraph. Your first paragraph elucidates what you're talking about and gives an example. Transition, second paragraph, second example. I'm doing this really fast. I do it in greater detail in other videos, which I'll post. Transition, third paragraph, third example of what you're talking about. Transition, conclusion. The conclusion is like very many ways you can conclude. Gesturing toward the future. What would a solution look like for this issue you've identified? Or elegiac, mourning those billion animals lost in the wildfires and vowing it'll never happen again. Or a call to action, right? Here's what you can do. Or invoking the next generation. Many ways to conclude, but a conclusion is a wrapping up. It kind of restates what you said and points the way forward. Add your name, your contact information, and a one-sentence bio. All right. Some publications need a headshot, simple headshot, high resolution. All right. Your bio is not this. John Doe is a Scorpio who loves playing pinochle and raising llamas. That is not a one-sentence bio. Often people send in those bios because they feel embarrassed or intimidated about not being someone who can say, John Doe went to Harvard and is a, senior fellow at the National Resources Leadership Council. Doesn't matter. A great one-sentence bio is, we have one DailyClout community member who wrote about working with heavy machinery. So she would be, Jane Doe operates heavy machinery and lives in Nogales, California. That is awesome. If you're a waiter, awesome. If you're unemployed, say it, right? No shame in that. If you're retired, say it. Whoever you are, a school teacher, a postman or woman, say it. There is nothing to be ashamed of. That is your bio. Wear it proudly. But it's like literally when I get these convoluted bios that don't simply say what you do and where you live, or who you are, or also what can be good is highlighting your expertise, right? If it's about finding mines and you're currently unemployed, but you used to be in the military looking for mines, say John Doe served in the US military and worked, as a minesweeping battalion, or whatever it is that references your expertise. And if you don't have any expertise, you're entitled to your opinion, and just say who you are in one sentence with no trickery. All right. And that's what you submit for an op-ed. And also be ready if they accept your op-ed, to set aside the next day or whenever your editor calls you or contacts you to edit it. And don't be difficult to edit. Whatever your editor says, unless you really can't bear it, he or she has a good reason for it. If it doesn't change what's factual about your piece, it's called being easy to edit, taking editorial direction. Be that writer, all right? Be easy to work with, be professional, be appreciative, get it done, and don't make them wait. Because especially if it's newsworthy, you want to move with the news cycle, which is all hands on deck. Get it done. Don't make them wait a moment any longer than they need to. All right, some outlets. You can upload your blog on WordPress right away, and then you can send editors what are called clips, which are those links to what you've already written. And if you're doing commentary, video journalism, just open a YouTube account. Don't wait for ABC or CNN to discover you. Discover yourself. And there are great guidelines that YouTube gives you for starting your own YouTube channel and being a commentator. I'm not going to dwell on those. We can do a separate video. I'm still learning myself, but I'm happy to share with you what I've learned. We're almost at 100,000 video views. So obviously something is working, and what has worked for DailyClout can work easily for you if you get on camera. And the last thing is tone. All right, and the last thing I want to say, many people make the mistake of feeling like to write or to be a citizen journalist, they have to sound fancy, or they have to sound like Fareed Zakaria, or someone who is trained by an Ivy League university and uses a lot of big words or jargon to showcase their expertise. No. The very best writing is, especially for citizen journalism, is when you write in your own voice. And I always tell my writers, write as if you're writing for a smart 16-year-old. I know that may sound crazy. Why would I do that? But trust me, especially if you're explaining something complicated, the most unpublishable material editors get is laden with jargon, right? It makes you want to kill yourself to read prose like that. But the best thing you can get is a fresh voice. A graduate student named Christian Brown wrote a piece for us, and it's up on DailyClout. And I don't think he's written a lot of op-eds, or maybe any, but he took my direction and he hit the ground running, and he explained Australian human rights law to a smart 16-year-old. And it's one of the most valuable pieces we could possibly publish. Another example is John Dee, who wrote about the Australian bushfire crisis. I asked him to write for a smart 16-year-old, and it's a readable piece that anyone can understand. When you're writing for a smart 16-year-old, it's actually harder than writing for your peers in your profession, if you're a sociologist, right? Or if you're a nurse, because you can't use jargon. You have to translate things to what, any bright kid or yourself when you were 16 could understand. And that is good writing. And when you also write from your heart, and this is another trick, which is the best writing tip I've ever been given, I'll share it with you now, then your prose just is approachable, and it moves quickly, and it's engaging, and it's understandable, and it's all the things that make viral journalism work and be publishable and move mountains. So the last tip I want to give you is one my agent gave me 30 years ago. It's the best tip anyone's ever given me, because I was writing in a much too jargony way, because I was insecure and I was 24 and I wanted to make sure everyone knew how smart I was. And so I was writing unreadable prose. And he said, Naomi, sit down and write me a letter. And he was very gruff. That was his manner. But I'm doing it to you now. Write Dear John at the top of the page, and then tell me what excites you about this, and then sign off. And then go back and erase the words, Dear John, and that's your first draft. He's totally right. So imagine your ideal reader, a friend, your best friend, your mom. I write for my mom these days. I used to write for my grandma, but she passed away. And write, especially if you're having trouble, write, Dear Naomi, if you like me, feel free to use me as a supportive presence in your brain, right? Or dear Sally, if Sally is your best friend, all right? And then share, and I do this to this day. Why am I wanting to tell this story? Why is this important to me? Why is it important, right? And that'll, in the Dear John format, you'll get right to why it's important without the what we call throat clearing and jargon. And then I swear to God, you go back and you erase Dear John, Dear Sally. That's your awesome first draft. And once you have your first draft, as my father used to say, and he also was a professional writer who taught me to write, once you've got your first draft, you can do anything. You can revise it. Without a first draft, you can't do anything. So 45 minutes, that's my tutorial, my mini tutorial on citizen journalism. Those are the best things I can share with you. They will make you a lot more powerful. Of course, there's always more to learn, and we'll keep updating your skills. But this is Naomi Wolf. I don't see comments, so I hope that means people were taking notes assiduously. Go out and change the world, and don't wait for journalism to find you. Major news media is not where it's at anymore, ladies and gentlemen. You be the news, and we will support you here at DailyClout. Thank you so much, and everyone remember, we struggle to keep our doors open and shine a light every day on democracies around the world, we at DailyClout. I volunteer. We have a range of volunteers who work so hard, but we have fixed costs. Hosting, data, developers, video editors, a webmaster, we have to pay people to keep the lights on. So please, people have been so wonderful. Go be a member. Go to Patreon. Please support us, whether it's $2 a month, $3.99 for membership, a one-time $10 donation, $25 a month, a one-time $100 donation, whatever you are moved to do. We can't sustain this incredible project without you. And it is a platform where we will run your news, we will run your op-eds, and we will report on what's happening in your community. So please consider being a member, giving a Patreon donation, and being part of our team here at DailyClout. Thank you so much, Naomi Wolf, and see you soon. Bye-bye.